Can I now move to members? And first off is Fine Gael start, Deputy Joe Carey, 4 minutes.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm just going to focus my attention in relation to the Shannon Foynes Port Company and in relation to the Rosslare Europort. And just to Mr. Keating, in terms of the potential that's there to develop an offshore renewable energy hub in the estuary, could you update us in relation to progress in that regard? And obviously it does tie into the work that is proposed in terms of having a Shannon Estuary Task Force. Maybe you could just bring us through that, and also the opportunity there to develop the Foynes logistical hub and global transshipment facility, you know, along the estuary as well. Could you please try and address those questions? Thanks.
So I suppose in relation to the ORE hub, if we look at the resource that's out there, which is, you know, depending who you talk to, between 30 to 70 gigawatts per annum, and that in context, the Irish grid is approximately 7,500 gigawatts. So what we have is a scale by 10 of the Irish demand, or the Irish local grid demand. So I suppose, and if you look at the current climate action plan, it talks about 70 by 30, 70% renewables by generated for our electricity supply by 2030. That actually misses the opportunity, because that other 90% of availability of potential power on the Atlantic needs to find the market. It's not going to be potentially the Irish market, so it will need to be exported. And there's two ways of doing that. There's either you use that power to create hydrogen or ammonia, which you can then as a liquid fuel for heavy transport, and you can ship that around the world or use in the domestic market, or you can build a new supergrid. But I suppose we've been very active with all of the, I suppose, the industry, and the industry has come to us, which is a good thing as well, in terms of the major wind developers looking at the potential to develop this ORE in the Shannon Estuary. So what that's about is really bringing the supply chain to the resource, because the energy itself is one part of it. That's 70 gigawatts, which is up for harnessing. It's 30 gigawatts per the government's programme. But with technology, that's going to increase over time. That's the power piece. But the actually underlying supply chain is where the real value add for the country is. And that's where those, and that Danish report, those 14,600 jobs are coming from. They're not coming from the actually energy generation, it's the supply chain. So what you require is facilities to manufacture potentially turbines, the floating devices or platforms themselves, plus all the anchorage systems and all the underlying components. So there's a whole raft and a very diverse engineering type supply chain required, and it's going to be required near a deep water port to access the energy itself, or you know, and the reason for that is to keep costs down, the operational costs down. For example, the LCOE, which is the KPI that measures the cost of energy across different sources. The LCOE for floating offshore wind is due to reduce to a similar level as thermal gas generation by late next decade. So everybody is saying, and when I say everybody, commentators, the industry are saying that the LCOE, or the efficiency of offshore wind, is going to be comparable to the best we have today in terms of thermal gas fossil fuel generation. So there's a massive opportunity here for this country to realise that potential. But we have to act fast as a country, and you know, we're competing against France, Spain, Norway, Denmark, countries who already have established supply chains in this area. So I suppose what we'd like to see is a policy recognition from government that there is a huge opportunity here. And the next question is then, how are we going to realise that? What do we need to put in place? Some of the low-hanging fruit are, as I mentioned in my statement, the marine spatial plan, which is due next year, and also an update of the foreshore bill, which previously was the map. They're critically important.
You have the integrated framework document put together by Clare, Limerick and Kerry councils as well.
Yes, yeah, and that's where the zonings, that 1,200 hectares of zonings that I mentioned, because this is so big, it'll be done on a number of different sites potentially. Those sites, those SDL sites that were zoned on the estuary. So you'd have the likes of Foynes, potentially Moneypoint, obviously, Ballylongford, Carricon and Clare. So all of those sites that have zonings are made for this. So the potential and the scope is huge. But as a country, we need to get ahead of it, because we are behind in terms of, we don't really have a national policy for floating offshore at this point. We do have the objective of getting 70% from renewables by 2030, but that is only for our own local grid. It is not for the big resource of 30 to 70 gigawatts, because our own local grid is only 6,500, 7,500. So that needs to be resolved. On the other point there, Deputy, the Foynes logistics hub, currently, you know, as you're aware, Foynes port is relatively isolated because we have, you know, we don't have adequate hinterland connection. So the first piece of this, to get that port and the port assets into the system, we need to connect it. So hence the road, that Limerick to Foynes road is critical. Yeah, and Limerick to Foynes road is going ahead of into Bortonala. Oral hearings are due, but it's critically important that the pressure is kept to get that road done, basically. And you know, it's still all going well, at least 3 years away. So until Shannon Foynes is connected, it's very difficult for it to contribute to the Brexit argument in terms of, you know, containers and all that, because we just don't have the connectivity that's suitable. That we're not close enough to the market. So that's an issue.
Chairman, could I just suggest that we note that concern and that we put it as part of our report, that we'd highlight the importance of that road and the connectivity to Shannon Foynes, and we'd make it a recommendation that it would be fast-tracked.
We'll wholeheartedly endorse that as a committee, Deputy Kerry. Thanks very much. Deputy Crowe, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to direct my initial questions to Pat Keating of the Shannon Foynes Port Company. Just first of all, I think there's a lot of really good work going on the Shannon Foynes Port Company, 8.5 billion generated through your activities, supporting 3,900 jobs. I would like to see, going forward, I think there's huge potential on the Clare side of the estuary. That's been identified in the strategic framework, but also, as we know, Moneypoint by 2025 will be moving out of fossil fuels, and its future beyond that isn't fully known. But yet it's widely expected it's going to be related to offshore renewables, namely wind energy. I think Moneypoint has an awful lot to offer the region and the whole west of Ireland. It has 400 kV power lines which were installed in the 80s, the likes of which we haven't seen installed elsewhere in Ireland in recent decades. Also, the jetty at Moneypoint, 380 metres long. I'm sure it's the envy of you over in Foynes, but that will not have the same level of usage when we move away from coal shipments coming in to West Clare. I think there's a huge opportunity to have a longer pier jetty there in the deepest channel of water on the Shannon that can accommodate vessels up to 290 metres in length. It's huge, it's colossal, its potential is huge. I would like to hear how you envisage Clare looping into all of your plans going forward, and I would also maybe ask you to comment on the cross-Shannon cable. This is the large, heavy volume electricity cable that will go below the estuary from Moneypoint to Kilpadoge in North Kerry. Just wondering, have you any inputs in that in terms of generating this whole renewable economy along the estuary? Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, so thanks, Deputy. So I suppose if you look at the harbour for Shannon Foynes Port Company, it's actually the entire lower Shannon estuary. So our harbour bounds, if you like, Clare, Kerry and Limerick County Council. So, and I suppose if you look at the integrated framework plan, which we were kind of a major contributor to, and the new sites, or the SDL, the strategic development locations that have been zoned, and that very much, I suppose, with our involvement. So we kind of look at the estuary in its entirety, and you know, we don't look at it on a county for county basis, because it is the Port Authority encompasses the Shannon estuary. So absolutely, there's huge advantages for the site on Moneypoint and the deep water. It's the only port in the country that can take in Cape-sized vessels, 300 metre long. So from that point of view, and with the Energy White Paper 2025 is fast approaching, from our discussions with ESB, and obviously the jetty is owned by ESB, but we do obviously talk to them on a regular basis. I think there is a consensus there that the floating offshore is going to be a prime target for that jetty. And I suppose one other huge advantage that Shannon Estuary has with regard to attracting in floating offshore is that there's already 1.6 gigawatts of fossil fuel power generation on the estuary between ESB and SSE. Now, two of those utilities are obviously very significant players in their own right. But and I think it's kind of common knowledge that ESB and Equinor are in a tie-up as well. So what we have at the moment is 1.6 gigawatts, which can act as a catalyst for the ORE, and you know that grid connection is there potentially.
If you forgive me to squeeze in one final question to you, Mr. Keating, before we wrap up, just what I'm hearing is Moneypoint and Clare can take the longest vessels in Ireland.
Correct.
Our airports can take the largest aircraft. There's huge, and this Transport Committee should note that there's huge potential going forward for Clare in the Midwest in terms of air and seafaring vessels being able to come in.
Yeah.
The last point I just want to reference, I think this would impact on all of you. The minute you step your toe into the water beyond your ports, you're dealing with foreshore licences and the Irish Foreshore Act. Concerns me hugely that this dates back to 1933 with very little overhauling. Is that inhibiting what you're doing at the moment, Mr. Keating?
Look, I mean, we currently have a new planning or foreshore application, for example, on a Foynes jetty that is almost 3 years in the running, for example. So, and our current foreshore runs after you get a planning. So when you add the two systems together, you're talking nearly 5 years just to get the consent for marine infrastructure.
Chairman, I think a recommendation this committee needs to be that we align ourselves somewhat similar to the planning process of 8 weeks and then an appeal process. It's unforgivable that projects like this could be delayed by 5 years. We've lost out in County Clare key projects, Cahercon, Kildysart, and this is multiplied many times over in fines. I'm sure you'll hear the same from Rosslare, Dublin Port. It's unforgivable that key legislation underpinning our foreshore wouldn't have been overhauled in 87 years. I think this committee needs to demand that, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Keating.
How do you work around it as well? I very much take that on board. Deputy O'Rourke, 4 minutes.
Thanks. And thanks for the presentations. And just to wish you all well in your endeavours, and I'm sure to a large degree you're in competition with each other. But from our perspective, I think we would all agree that we'd like to see some degree of coordination and a successful outcome for the state and the country as a whole. I'll direct my questions to Mr. O'Reilly, if that's okay. You've depicted a scenario there, outlined the scale of the challenge, and it seems quite spectacular one, really, in terms of the level. It's transformative change, really, that's needed at the port. You say that you know that you would rather that the ships, rather than coming in on top of each other, that there were staggered arrival times. At the other end, we hear from hauliers and from shipping companies criticising the current traffic management systems in place. There's issues, if you'll speak to, in relation to the vehicle booking system, the IT systems that for pre-clearance that aren't actually in existence on some of the ferry companies. My question is in relation to modelling and what we can actually expect, or what do you expect to see on the 1st of January? This idea of potential traffic chaos, of lorries doing a loop around the M50 and the Port Tunnel, I think will worry a lot of people. So just in terms of the modelling that you have done, the expectation, and then in terms of your ask of government and your ask of this committee, what you need us to hear to support you in your role in preparation for Brexit. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy. As to what we expect, I suppose before coming here today, you'd obviously do a lot of thinking about what you're going to say to a committee like this, and inevitably you tend to focus on what you see as the challenges that are coming. And maybe what I should say is that I think Dublin Port is remarkably well prepared for Brexit, given the scale of the challenge. The sheer physical infrastructure that OPW have put in, the amount of work that has been done by Customs and by the Department of Agriculture, it is enormous. And just reflecting on the comments I made, there really are comments where I'm more worrying about the efficiency of what will happen rather than the effectiveness of it. And the focus on efficiency comes from the sheer busyness of Dublin Port. It is an unbelievably busy port. It is 2.5 times busier, for example, than the port of Rotterdam in terms of the number of tonnes per hectare per annum. Likewise, 2.5 times busier than the port of Barcelona. So in talking about the likes of that U-turning facility that I mentioned, that really does need to be understood in the context of contingency planning. I think if we look at the UK, I think we're looking at a situation where all they're doing is planning for catastrophe, as I can see it, things like Kent passports and such like. I believe that the preparations that have been made, there will be problems in January, there's no doubt. I believe, though, that they will be effective. And the types of contingency measures that I set out, I think they're essential. I think risk management is at the core of the industry. I think all of us within the ports are always looking at risk management and identifying contingencies. I think if I came here today and wasn't able to answer the question as to what happens if things go wrong, I think that would be bad. Have I answered all of your questions? Vehicle booking system. We're developing Dublin Port. We have a master plan 2040. Pat is a year ahead of us at 2041. We have a master plan under which we're looking to double the volume throughput between now and 2040. That can only, on the same footprint of land, that can only happen with an awful lot of digital technology. So Brexit is accelerating the need for us to push Dublin Port into digitisation in a big way. There are very sophisticated systems within the 3 container terminals managing their internal operations, but we need an overarching system which is managing the flow of traffic in and out of those terminals, in and out of the ro-ro terminals. Nearly all of the landside movements in Dublin Port happen over 60 hours of the week, Monday to Friday. It's still a very traditional working week for goods leaving the port by land and coming in. The ships come in 24 hours a day, the terminals work 24 hours a day. We have got to push some of the activity of Dublin Port into the other 108 hours. That's absolutely essential. That gives us access to the capacity of the Dublin Port Tunnel, the capacity of the network when it's not otherwise that busy. That's the real challenge, and we need these digital technologies. So that's going to be a big focus of our development in the future. In recent years, I think, and again, it's going to continue, our focus has been on concrete and steel. We've invested in the last 3 years 216 million euros in capital investment. There's another 83 planned for next year. The scale of investment in infrastructure in Dublin Port is absolutely enormous. That is necessary, but of itself not sufficient. We also need to drive efficiencies with digital technologies. Okay. And as I say, Brexit is really highlighting the need for that.
Yeah, and the asks of government, I suppose, conclude a Brexit deal, but also you mention, availability of staff. Like, have systems been stress tested yet?
We provide the infrastructure. I believe that they have, and I have to say I believe that they have, because the systems that are at the core of making all of this work are the systems of revenue, essentially. And the Commissioner of the Revenue Commissioners, if I remember his figures correctly, talked about an increase of customs entries from 1.6 million up to 20 million. But my belief is, yes, that the systems...
But they haven't got staff on site, and you want a commitment of them that they'll be there 24/7.
Let me... Yeah. No, there definitely are staff on site. There definitely are staff on site. There's huge amounts. But what we need to get, if we're going to drive efficiencies, we need to understand the key performance indicators. There's a critical thing happens when the ferries arrive and there's food containers with food products or products of animal plant origin. They all have to go through one particular set of checks. It's to understand what the capacity of that is per hour. How is it running? So that the hauliers and the cargo owners can get a sense as to what do they need. That allows them to have more informed conversations with the ferry lines, for example,
so better information and better data from the exercises that are...
But these are very much, to my mind, the problems of success. Yeah. We are looking at fine-tuning a really superb piece of preparation by a whole range of agencies.
Okay, thanks.
My next Fine Gael question. It strikes me that, like, we've 84% of all container and trailers going through Dublin Port. We've the same with Dublin Airport. We need to get more down to the regions. We need to get more into Shannon, Foynes Port Company, and Cork and Rosslare. I've two quick questions. A quick question for Mr. Keating. Mr. Keating, if the rail, the Limerick to Foynes rail, was built and the road is built, what does that do in terms of the capacity for Shannon Foynes Port Company on containers, and what additional traffic can it take to take the pressure off the likes of Dublin Port?
So on the two of those, connectivity pieces, the road is absolutely the more important of the two, giving the volumes that, you know, that the road could bring in comparison to the rail. The rail is probably a niche market, and even with the rail reinstated, you're probably looking at 5 to 10% of our projected volumes.
What will go on the rail?
You could put containers on it. You can also put bulks on it. So you can put a mixture. But the rail itself is just a single track. So the rail infrastructure is a limited, even though if
the road was to go in, how much could the capacity? If the road was to go in, what would the capacity of Shannon Fines Port Company go up by?
Well, with us having building in parallel new port infrastructure such as the Deepwater Quay, you could increase it up to 10 million tonnes, an extra 10 million tonnes per annum.
And from what?
From we currently do 10 million over the entire estuary, so Foynes is doing roughly 2 to 2.2 million tonnes.
You could double that over how many years?
Absolutely. Well, that's the problem, and goes back to that Deepwater jetty will take at least 7 years from going through the consenting process, the procurement to
that's something we need to work on as a committee.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Reilly, just going back, just quick questions. The hauliers have been in contact with me and many others, right? And the one issue that comes up is there are 3 competing terminals in Dublin Port, and you have no vehicle booking system. I think Cork has one, and it appears to be a huge area of frustration for the hauliers, and they say it's the responsibility of Dublin Port to have it in place. Furthermore, they're saying this morning you have 2 ports arriving, one Irish Ferries and one Stena, both from Holyhead, arriving into Dublin Port at 5 a.m. this morning, chock-a-block with trucks. And the question is, and you make reference yourself, that you say we would like borders will cause the current ferries' arrival times. They're arriving in pairs and 4-way of 6 hours apart. So the question I suppose I have is, what are you doing to put a vehicle booking system in place? Do you believe that the ferry system you have in place now will say to mainland Europe, how will that benefit in terms of our Brexit context? And also you make reference in your submission, you said a huge Brexit infrastructure in place, but not in itself sufficient. It needs to be manned and operated on a truly 24/7-hour basis by state agencies. You need to expand. That looks to me to be a qualified criticism of what the state are putting in place in supports in terms of checks and so forth. You suggest the hauliers and that they tell the ferry companies that when the current holiday arrival times actually meet or not. They're doing that. So they're coming back and saying this is the responsibility of Dublin Port and you as CEO of Dublin Port. So why isn't there a vehicle book system in place? When will you put it in place? What have you done to where we don't have 2 ferries arriving in 5 a.m. in the morning, chock-a-block? And what are you doing in terms of developing the container traffic? We'll say ferries direct to Rotterdam. That'll cut down the carbon footprint because it won't involve trucks. So can you just deal with those few items? Vehicle booking system, the times of the ferries, and developing a container business. And many of the hauliers are saying that the storage facilities in place now for containers is wholly inadequate, spread around Dublin, not at the port anymore, and it's going to cause chaos. So can you just deal with those points, Mr. O'Reilly?
I'll do my best. In relation to booking systems and container terms, the big difference between the 3 container terms in Dublin Port and that in the Port of Cork, the Port of Cork actually own all of the equipment and operate the terminal themselves. The 3 terminals in Dublin are operated by 3 private sector companies who are competing with each other. Now, they do have systems which are capable of being expanded to have booking. The systems they have are unbelievably complex in terms of the amount of data on a container ship with, let's say, 600 containers coming in. So these are very complex systems. My view is that it is, in the first instance, it is up to the individual terminals with the technologies they have available to them to put in place booking systems, very similar to what the Port of Cork has done.
But surely under your licensing system with them, I'm assuming they operate under licence in Dublin Port, surely you can go in and make it a condition of the licence that they put in consistent comparative booking systems. Because what's happening at the moment is the hauliers are saying They're back. They're literally. They said it's almost like a zoo at 5 a.m. in the morning when the ferries arrive in. They're coming in at different times, and they said if a booking system was in place, it would make it highly efficient. This is pre-COVID, pre-Brexit, but it would make an enormous difference on Brexit. So will you give a commitment here that you will engage with the terminal operators, looking at the licence in place, so that you can put such a streamlined vehicle booking system in place?
I'll absolutely give that commitment. We do have a commitment to introduce a whole swathe digitalisation
But
right across the port.
will you give that commitment today to look at that with the terminal owners?
100%. 100%. Unfortunately, their licences, some of those leases go back to B&I days and are 150-year-old leases. So they have very strong franchises.
I would suggest that the challenge of Brexit is so big that they will have to be, a way will have to be around. It's not possible that come the 1st of January, and we're suddenly chaos. So you deal with the ferries, another feature, ferries coming in, trailing each other from Holyhead, Stena and Irish Ferries and others. And what you're doing about getting direct access into Europe and also in terms of the containers, which would reduce the carbon footprint and everyone would benefit.
Just as regards direct services like the Rotterdam and Zeebrugge, there has been enormous increase. New services, new capacity. The month of October just passed was the second busiest month in the history of Dublin Port, only surpassed by October of last year.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely regular occurrence that you see existing lines adding extra ships to their services. We also have a new container service.
What are you doing to promote container traffic rather than lorries driving? What are you doing to promote that on the sea?
That is happening. So the roll-on, roll-off ships that go to Zeebrugge and Rotterdam maximum carry 12 drivers. They will carry a mixture of containers and trailers, unaccompanied. That is happening.
And then finally, your discussions with the ferries in terms of staggering the times of the ferries, because it appears at this stage that it's like the bumpers, the old bumpers. They're literally coming in and it's chaos.
I wouldn't disagree with you, Chairman. That is the case. We are talking with this, as you'll appreciate, immensely commercially sensitive, that they have a very firm view that the market requires of them something different to what the hauliers are saying. So it is what is one of the good things, one of the very good things from this session this morning. It is airing this issue. The airing of this issue.
Is there a need for a PSO of some form to ensure that times can be staggered on ferries? A public service obligation.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the I don't believe that there is. I think this is a case where the market will work. I think I'd be looking at the hauliers, and we will be working very strongly with the hauliers from the middle of December, encouraging them to get the message.
I would suggest you engage more with the hauliers. And then the final question then I wanted to ask was when you look at what are you doing to ensure about the containers, about the storage areas for containers?
I think that's probably a reference to the storage of empty containers. Yes. We have been removing empty containers from the port because they take up too much space. The loss of 14.5 hectares for Brexit is not good for our future capacity, but what we are doing, and it is under construction, we are building a brand new depot which we've leased to a third party at a place called Dublin Inland Port. It's a 40-hectare site.
When will that be ready?
That will be ready next year. I'm hoping by about September.
So finally, do you believe that you're ready to go come the 1st of January with Brexit coming in Dublin Port?
I believe Dublin Port is ready to go. Do I have concerns? I do have concerns. I think there's so many unknowabilities.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Ned O'Sullivan.
I'd like to welcome all our guests. And my questions are particularly directed at CEO of Shannon Foynes, Pat Keating. I was 16 years either a director or a commissioner on the Shannon Estuary. I worked with Pat. I'd like to congratulate him and all his team in Shannon Foynes for the outstanding work they're doing. I've just a couple of brief questions, Cahill. Reference has been made already to, we say, the changing situation in terms of fossil fuel. And that has been a huge part of the profitability of Shannon Foynes, and with Tarbert on oil, the Money Point on coal, all looking to be past tense already. and with the unfortunate decision not to proceed or not to get of the programme for government not to support the Shannon LNG project, which I think is very short-sighted. Is there a threat, Pat, to the ongoing profitability of Shannon Foynes Port, seeing as we had a fair dependence on the fossil fuel business? And in terms of the programme for government did say to us in the region, I suppose in compensation for the high expectations we had of jobs creation with the LNG, that they were going to investigate and invest and set up more or less task forces to find alternative employment, and Shannon Foynes obviously would be central to that in terms of, you mentioned the ore and the offshore stuff. Has Shannon Foynes been directly contacted by government in relation to progressing what was promised in the programme for government? Are there plans afoot? And is there anything you can advise us on that? Because I raised the question in the Shannon recently and I'm as wise as ever. And finally, on a positive note, you know, I think because of our position there on the map, Shannon Foynes may be in a position to, you know, to benefit from Brexit, perhaps more than others. Obviously, it's a threat, but it also creates opportunities. And would it be a case, Pat, do you think, to reopen the whole question of establishing somewhere along the estuary a transshipment port to deal with major imports that could be redistributed into the European ports later on? As you know, we have the deepest natural port in Europe outside of Rotterdam. There's a huge delay in turnaround time in these European ports. Surely there's an advantage here for Shannon that we could take in larger loads and have them broken up and redistributed to Europe bypassing the UK. So I'll just leave it at that, Cahill.
Mr. Keating.
Yeah. So thanks, Deputy. Absolutely, in terms of the fossil fuels, you know, our underlying business was very reliant on, you know, the likes of coals through Moneypoint, for example, you know, even the home heating oils, petrol, diesels, all of that, you know, there is change coming and all of that. But I suppose as a company and as a commercial company, you have to deal with change all the time. So, and I think for once, given our location, we're actually probably, and going back to the ORE, that we're actually very well placed to capitalise on that potential, which can in fact be much greater than anything that came before it. You know, and our ambitions is to set up what they call a marshalling port, which is to set up that supply chain for the construction phases of floating wind farms, and that is then you get in. You know, the manufacturing of the floating devices themselves, or the platforms, which are primarily steel and concrete, which are basic enough, but they're very big, heavy, chunky devices that require a lot of shipping and a lot of port infrastructure. So in terms of the fossil fuels, yes, you know, there is a dip in current short-term profitability, but I think in the long term we're actually very well placed to capitalise on the move to the low-carbon economy. And the ORE is one. And it's not just about electricity generation. Coming from that, you've also the potential of hydrogen or ammonia production, which will be a new liquid fuel, and that's more geared towards HGVs and buses. And you saw Dublin Bus ordering the first hydrogen buses as a pilot scheme recently. So offshore floating wind, together with hydrogen, ammonia production go hand in glove. And therefore, from our point of view, just on the fossil fuel thing and the transition, there's the energy generation from an ORE hub, but there's also a second piece of it in a hydrogen production. And
Senator's question on the trans.
Yeah. I mean, again, that is something. You know, looking, it is down, and I've mentioned it in my statement as creating a transshipment hub on the estuary. Again, but you almost have to go back to first principles there, where you build that base up from some domestic kind of supply into the domestic market first. There's very few 100% there isn't any actually 100% transshipment facilities worldwide. You do need a portion of domestic cargoes as well to support that. You can't walk before you can run, kind of thing. So, but it's something, and given our, I suppose, proximity again, closest port potentially to the US market and all, there is potential for a transshipment between Europe, Ireland, North America, South America. But that's more, as I said, medium term. I think what we need to get sorted first is the connectivity to the port is absolutely critical before we can kind of get onto those objectives.
Thanks, Mr. Keating. Deputy Verona Murphy.
you, Chair. And just, Mr O'Reilly, just to go back, welcome to everybody. And if I could just commend Rosslare on the great work done in obtaining a new operator for direct ferry service. That'll certainly go a long way towards Brexit traffic. Mr O'Reilly, just going back to the Chair's point that there are 4 ships that arrive in Dublin in 45 minutes in the morning time, from 5:30 to 6:15, 2 from Liverpool, 2 from Holyhead. Now, when did you last meet with the IRHA?
When
The
did I
Hauliers
last meet?
representative, yeah.
I haven't had a meeting with the IRHA. I think the last time I was probably talking to your good self.
That's right. That was in 2018. I reviewed the minutes last night, and all of the points that you make in your statement in relation to the shipping companies, they're all points that were raised by the IRHA, in which case you were asked to ask the ferry terminal the container terminal operators to vary their opening times. You were asked if the shipping companies could reorganise their sailings, all of which were in preparation for Brexit. It's actually 3 years ago. All of those points were made then. So can you tell me what progress was made on those points in the 3 years? From your own statement, I'm assuming none.
The ferries are still coming in at the same times today
And did you make a request?
3 years ago. Yes,
I saw your very public spat with Irish Ferries, or with Stena Line. Yeah. So, I mean, the issue here is we have a public infrastructure, Dublin Port, which is congested today and expected to be chaotic post-Brexit. It's congested today. As you, in your own statement, you say that everything operates the same as it did when B&I Line were there. Are you absolving yourself of any responsibility as the CEO of Dublin Port in that everything has stayed the same? Every day we hear from politicians and people like yourselves, Brexit's going to change things, and that we have to go with the change. So what has changed about any of these things?
If I take the ferries, the ferry lines are still running on the same schedules as they were running in the 1980s. So
I just pointed that out.
I know. So this is not something that I can very easily change. I can't. Have we tried? Have I tried? Yes, indeed.
I don't have
yes,
a lot
indeed.
of time. What I'll ask you is what you did to try and change it. What did you do? What proactive approach did you take to reorganise those sailings?
We have been talking commercially confidentially with the ferry companies, trying to get them to change. They are very adamant in their view.
Chair, if I could just interrupt, Mr. It's not commercially sensitive. This is a publicly owned piece of infrastructure that depends on the economy of Ireland surviving, that we have free-flowing traffic for exports and imports. And I don't believe it's commercially sensitive. If you were asked the question, if it was to take a PSO in order to make those schedules work, to change them around, that's the type of proactive approach I'm looking for. So let me hear what the approach was, and did it work, because obviously not.
Mr O'Reilly, the key thing that Deputy Murphy is making is, what has been your engagement with the ferries? How intensive has it been? What proposals have you put? We're in a Brexit situation. So we have to be outside the box. So I think Deputy Murphy is making a very valid point. So could you just, rather than we'll say, we understand commercial, but this is far bigger than that. It's chaotic at the moment. I mean, Deputy Murphy knows it firsthand, every morning. So you have to give us,
sure.
We'll say, we prefer if you maybe just lifted that veil for a minute and let us know what has been the engagement. Why have there been no changes in over the last 12 months? 2 years virtually.
If I can respectfully disagree, I wouldn't describe what happens in Dublin Port of a morning as being chaos.
Sorry, Mr O'Reilly, I'm an operator. I have operated out of 3 ports of today being represented. It is chaotic. And you haven't engaged with those who are using it by your own admission. So how would you know what their opinion is?
With respect to...
Will you just give us an indication, detail, of your engagement with the ferries? We can have different... If we've hauliers ringing us, I'm not a haulier, but they've rang, and I've met them, and we've met them repeatedly, and about to Deputy Murphy, she has been that, she has threatened that port. But I've hauliers ringing, exasperated by the fact that ferries are coming in early in the morning, all together. They're suddenly absolute chaos. They're waiting hours. It doesn't even fit in with schedules. They have no booking system. So the question is, can you just go through in detail what has been your engagement with the ferries? What are their objections? What would work? Because we can't have a situation whereby we're going to put hauliers at risk. The goods they supply, you made reference to earlier yourself, many of them agricultural, perishable goods. So if you could just give us a detail on it.
Respectfully, Chair, I really do have to disagree. It is not chaos. I've had ministers down. Probably half of the cabinet from the previous government have been down at 5 o'clock. That's the normal time I would invite guests down to have a look. It isn't chaos. It is unbelievably busy. But
are the hauliers incorrect when they say it's chaos?
I don't believe it's chaos. I've been working in Dublin Port for 30 years.
So
on and off. So
let me explain the chaos, Chair. The chaos is trying to get your empty container delivered as described by the chairman outside of the port, trying to get back into the port to get another container on when then the container terminal closes and the driver has nowhere to park or even go to the toilet. The other chaos is 4 ferries disembarking at least 1,000 trucks every morning of the week that meet the container terminals opening in the morning at the same time, and all the traffic converges onto the M50 at rush hour. And in any case, we don't even have a traffic management plan, in which I will come to. But the question you were asked is, what engagement have you had and what result was yielded with the ferry companies?
If you spend a bit of time, it's important that we find out what has been the engagement in detail.
This is actually important, Chairman. We should let her get the answer.
So, Mr. Murphy,
if I can, there's 2 issues Deputy Murphy brings up and they're overlapping. The ferries and the container terminals. Let me deal with them separately. The ferries come in of a morning. There are 4 ferries, absolutely correct. 2 from Liverpool, 2 from Holyhead. The Liverpool ferries are unaccompanied. They don't generate a lot of immediate traffic onto the road system.
Not always, but anyway. They're not always.
They don't generate a lot by comparison with the Holyhead ferries. They flow remarkably well. They have been for many years.
That's not the question, Mr. O'Reilly. The question is, what engagement have you had to vary the sailing times? And they don't flow. We accept that they won't flow remarkably well post-Brexit, post the transition period ending on the 1st of January. We're not talking, we know now it's congested. So what has happened to change it for the 1st of January?
Mr. O'Reilly.
We have been and continue to talk with the ferry companies. If you mentioned the article that was in the Irish Times. That afternoon I spoke with the gentleman from Stena Line who was quoted in the article.
You said earlier on, Mr. O'Reilly, that your attitude was Brexit's happening, Brexit's going ahead. That was the same for Mr. Grant. In 2018, the minutes of which you held a meeting in Dublin Port, all of these propositions were put to you. Since 2018 to 2020, what has happened?
Deputy, let me rely on my own experience. I ran a container terminal in Dublin Port, brought a brand new service in. As part of that new service offering, we provided 24-hour collection and delivery services. It was financially ruinous because there was no demand. There is a chicken and egg situation here.
What has been your engagement? No, the question is, what has been your engagement with the ferry companies over the last 18 months about preparing for Brexit and looking to alter the times so you don't have this backup of trucks, hauliers at Dublin? That's the question from Mr. You just deal with that specifically.
My answer to the question is there has been huge engagement with the ferry companies on all aspects of preparation for Brexit. So, particularly putting in new gates for customs and Garda immigration services. On the issue of ferry arrival times, the ferry companies are adamant, the view they will always give back to us, they are adamant that the current timings are what their customer wants. It's completely at variance, Mr. Chairman, with what is being said to you. Yeah. So if you like, I'm caught between a rock and a hard place.
Not at all. You're not. You're the CEO of Dublin Port. When you say you're caught between a rock and a hard place, what did you do with the information? Did you wait to come here today, a month out from the end of the transition period, to tell us that the ferry companies will have to engage with the hauliers, whom you don't engage with, to get those timetables shifted? Is that your answer?
My answer is that we've been engaging with the ferry companies.
But you've yielded nothing.
We cannot force the ferry companies.
So what has your engagement been about, Mr. O'Reilly? If you can't, have you spent 3 years talking?
We can't force them. If I attempted to change the slots of a ferry company, I have no doubt we will be up in the courts.
It would appear from that, Chair, from that statement alone, that Dublin Port is not an independently operated port, and there's a huge problem here from the 1st of January. It will be very significant. And I can assure you, I have one other serious question that needs to be answered. Who is in charge on the 1st of January when the traffic chaos ensues? Who is the go-to person that the buck stops with?
On the 1st of January, when the trucks start moving in and out of container terminals, in and out of ferry terminals, there are mixed authorities.
I only want one name. I want one name of a coordinated traffic management plan. I don't want a mixed, because you're going to say to me, it's Dublin Port, it's the
there are 3 other members
tunnel.
to come in, unfortunately.
There are operations managers in Dublin Port, and there's coordination people from among the different state agencies. There are 8 different sites that...
Mr. O'Reilly, can you come back to us with the details on who actually will be the responsible?
The significance of that, Chair, is this. Dublin Port tunnel legally cannot be blocked up. I understand there's a traffic management plan to deal with that. That's wholly inefficient. But what I will say is this. If you're going to have to go, if you're in the port and you're looking for someone, you're outside the port and you're looking for someone, it's not good enough. My recommendation to the committee would be that we need one person who heads up a traffic management plan. And equally, that if the barrier was removed from the port tunnel, which is outrageous, it causes 3,000 trucks a day to stop expending a litre of fuel. It should be removed.
Well, then we'll take that, and Mr. O'Reilly, you need to come back to us. What you're telling us here today is unacceptable. You're basically telling us that if you're looking, you must come back to us with a solution, that the ferry companies will vary their times with the hauliers. We'd ask you to come back to us on that. Can I go to... correct. I'm conscious of other members. Deputy Muraku, 4 minutes.
All right. Very quickly, I suppose back to Mr. O'Reilly, and look, I thank all the speakers for all that they've said. Right. I'm going to follow up on some things that were already put to you. Like we're talking about, obviously, we're looking down the gauntlet of Brexit, and again, Deputy O'Rourke put it to you as regards the revenue commissioners, because I think at one stage you had inferred, or I thought that you may have been looking for a greater level of resources. I know that you're fairly sure, or you said that the IT systems have been stress tested as regards revenue, so you could stand over that.
As best I know, Deputy.
Right, okay. But I'm really going back to what are your asks of government, and I would have to add my voice to the fact that, see, when I hear about the Dublin Port Tunnel and literally the fact that it could be used as a sort of drive around, or, very inefficient, parking system, it obviously absolutely frightens all of us. And have you any information in relation to the fact, and again, this could also go possibly to Mr. Carr, of any changes that are happening, and whether you would have numbers on people that are looking to, as I say, move goods directly from Europe, rather than, or people who are going to use the land bridge, which, we're in the Brexit situation. I think what Michel Barnier says is coming down to the next couple of days in relation to whether there's a deal. None of this is going to be perfect, but it could be a lot more imperfect.
As regards the land bridge, there are direct services from Dublin Port to Cherbourg, which go on alternate days with an equivalent service from Rosslare to Cherbourg. So there is a Cherbourg connection. There is now the Dunkirk connection from Rosslare, and we were delighted to see that. There's a real issue of geography here. Once the land bridge is lost, it really is difficult to drive accompanied services.
Yeah.
And Rosslare is undoubtedly the best place for it to happen. So
we have no notion in relation to the numbers, and basically, I suppose, that the market wants at the minute, do we?
The number that's generally talked about on the land bridge is something of the order of 150 to 175,000 loads per year. In the publicity around last week's announcement, there was talks, Glenn Carr would probably know better than me from Rosslare, 50 to 60,000 perhaps might use that Dunkirk service. There's a lot of different variables. In respect of the direct delivery of goods from Dublin into continental Europe, there is absolutely enormously increased capacity. It's all unaccompanied. It is trailers or containers, and I have no doubt that if demand goes up, the ships will follow. But as for direct services, driver company from Dublin, you're not going to be seeing a lot of that, I suspect.
Right. No, I imagine, and as I say, if I could put the same to Mr. Carr, but also, I suppose a similar question in relation to how feasible then is it possibly to stagger times in relation to ferries coming in? Look, whatever the rights and wrongs of what have been done, I'm accepting there are difficulties in relation to this, but it involves a conversation with all stakeholders, which is hauliers combined with the ferries, etc.
Eamon is right. There's about 150 to 170,000 trucks going through the land bridge at the moment, and the whole essence of the services in Dunkirk is to tap into that market. On average, each ship would take about 130 trucks per sailing, so that you're looking at about 40,000 in, 40,000 out. However, one of the very positive things with DFDS is their capability to ramp that up if needs be, and we certainly in Rosslare have the capability to do that. I mean, part of any negotiations with these companies is they want to provide the best possible service to the customer at the end of the day to attract it on. So there are consultations, not just with the port, but with the market. And the schedule that has been agreed for the DFDS schedule reflects both what the market wants, but our capability also to ensure that we can deliver the service to the shipping line, which is equally critically important. There's no point in being in a port if you're going to be held up on the ship for 2 hours.
I accept that. I think there needs to be flexibility across the board.
Absolutely,
on this.
And generally speaking, look, we're a bit lucky in Rosslare in that we have capacity. We have plans to develop the master plan to take in more capacity, and we have to relook at. We're not a 24-hour operational port. We are open 24 hours. So all of that plays into when you're scheduling services.
We have 2 more to get in.
But the only thing I said was what asks of government, because obviously we have worries out, what needs to happen now?
If you ask me what's the single ask we would have, the single ask we would have is, if you like, moral suasion. If you are hearing from the haulage industry, we will certainly be saying it. We have been now saying it very publicly since that article. It is in our benefit and everyone's for the.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Deputy Matthews, 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just to refer to an issue brought up by Deputy Crowe earlier on in relation to the foreshore licensing, I'm sure the witnesses be interested and probably aware that the Marine Planning and Development Management Bill is progressing at the moment, and that will implement that single and much more efficient marine planning system, and any input from any of the ports would be welcome on that process at the moment. Mr. Keating, you referred to the importance of the reopening of the rail connection between Shannon and Foynes and the importance of the ORE industry, 2 projects which I firmly support, and I think they're very, very positive for that region. And the loss of LNG or fossils will be more than made up for by the renewable energy industry and the potential that brings to this country. There's no future in fossils whatsoever. So in relation to what Mr. Keating talked about for Shannon Foynes, I'd like to ask Mr. Carr and Mr. Kenny possibly, is there any scope to have rail freight as part of Rosslare Port? And is Rosslare Port in a position to scale up to take advantage of the offshore renewable industry and the 5 gigawatts in the Irish Sea? And there's a lot of land around Rosslare Port, and we've heard a huge amount of talk about road-based freight, which will always be part of freight in this country, there's no doubt of that. But we really, if we're going to reduce transport emissions and air issues with air quality, we need to concentrate a lot on rail. Rail is the future. It's the year of the rail in Europe at the moment, and I would just be interested on your view on Rosslare and rail freight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take them separately, offshore first and then rail freight, because I look after rail freight also as part of my remit. Yeah. In regards to, obviously today was about Brexit, so I didn't submit offshore, but offshore wind is absolutely our next target in Rosslare Europort, and Rosslare Europort is the best geographically positioned port to where the offshore wind along the southeast is happening. And yes, there will be floating wind, but that's some way away. Our initial target with the Climate Action Plan is to put in place the offshore wind farms that are planned at the moment. And no port currently has the facilities for what's expected. However, we have engaged extensively with the offshore wind market, with the developers, and we are at this point taking plans to government and the department to develop Rosslar Europort as the offshore wind hub for the country. And I strongly believe we are the only port that has the potential to be developed. It needs investment, but we have the land, we have the road connection. In regards to offshore wind and rail freight, look at the offshore wind energy companies want to assemble at quayside and straight back out again. In regards to rail freight, again, very positive news. We are obviously just commissioning a final report on the development of rail freight. There's great opportunities for rail freight to be developed in the country. It has been underutilised and has been probably under-supported and needs, again, investment in that area. And we are also taking plans to our board to develop rail freight, part of which would be to connect into ports. We are already connected to Dublin Port and Waterford Port, but we'd like to be connected to Cork Port, Shannon Foynes. For Rosslare, it's a bit more challenging. It's a single line from Rosslare up to Dublin, first of all. And secondly, the current Waterford to Rosslare line is not in operation. So again, from a policy point of view, that would need to be looked at. There is nothing to stop rail freight being developed into Rosslare. However, for the moment, what we've been really concentrating on is growing our current roll-on, roll-off business. And definitely we do see a great opportunity for the port and for the region for the offshore wind. That is our focus. But we'd obviously play our part in regards to the development of rail freight as well. But I do see that probably more likely to other ports, particularly with Waterford being so close to us. It's a lift-on, lift-off.
Terribly sorry.
Sorry, Chairman.
That would be great.
Thanks, Mr. Sorry, Mr. Carr. Senator Burt, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I want to first of all thank all the witnesses. I want to congratulate Mr. McGettigan on his appointment as CEO of the Port of Cork, and to thank him for his very important contribution. Can I ask him 2 specific questions? Could he speak about the roll-on, roll-off opportunities for Cork and avoiding the land bridge? And in your presentation to us, you speak about the whole issue of the border control inspection post. Can you expand on that in terms of the context of EU Atlantic connectivity and the relationship between hauliers and the container traffic? But thank you for your work. I wish you every success, and thank you for being here today. And apologies for the brevity.
Sorry, Mr. McGettigan, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Deputy. On the roll-on, roll-off, currently we take about 5,000 loads a week, and we could up that to 35,000 with our existing facilities. And related to that, though, is the border control inspection point, which if we had one in Cork, we could receive goods from outside the EU, which would be the UK in this point. And so we could do that if the border control inspection point was put into Cork. And that is something people have talked about, an ask from government. That would be an ask from Cork. Our new container terminal can handle 50% more volume than we currently have, which would be about another 100,000 containers a year. Those containers could come directly from the continent, avoiding the land bridge. That answer your question, Deputy?
Okay, thank you. And I just think that we need to come back to this particular matter because it's a very our ports policy is one that we should just have in today in a quick meeting. But thank you, Mr. McGettigan. I wish you every success in your
early in the new year.
In your new role.
Early in the new year, we'll have further hearings around the whole area of ports, and we thank all of you, all of you, for attending today's engagement committee. The meeting is now adjourned. The next meeting, joint will be private virtual meeting, 4 p.m. next Tuesday, 8th December. Next public meeting, joint, will be next Wednesday, the 9th of December, 11:30, committee room 4. My apologies for rushing people, but in these COVID times. Thank you.